The barn was warm with lamplight, the kind that softened every face and turned dust in the air into tiny golden sparks. Hay lay scattered across the plank floor, crushed flat by boots tapping to the steady strum of guitars and the aching hum of a fiddle. It was a night meant for laughter and music, the kind of night where even the quietest soul might find their hands clapping, their feet moving without asking their permission. She stood near the wall, fingers brushing the hem of her blue dress. She had sewn it herself, every stitch pulled in the dim light of her cabin's oil lamp, every seam tugged tight in a way that made her shoulders a little straighter. The bodice hugged her frame, the skirt flaring out in a soft sweep. She'd added lace at the sleeves, more out of stubbornness than fashion, a way to say I can still make beauty out of what I have. But beauty, she knew, wasn't often granted to women like her in other people's eyes. Too tall for a woman, some had said, it's around for a dance floor. Too much for a small town that liked its women in smaller portions. A few men glanced her way. None came forward. The music carried on. Then he appeared, the one she'd once thought she might marry. A rancher with a handsome face and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He strode toward her with the swagger of someone who knew. People were watching. Dance with me, he said, holding out his hand. She took it, a flicker of surprise lighting her chest. But then, before they reached the floor, his voice turned sharper, louder. Meant for others to hear? On second thought, he chuckled, glancing toward his friends. The floor's for light feet. The laugh that followed wasn't hers. It came from behind him, from the corner where his companions leaned on the wall like they owned the room. Something inside her tightened. She let her hand fall back to her side and turned toward the door. The fiddle kept playing. The room kept spinning, but she felt as if all sound had drained away. She reached for the barn door's iron latch when a voice, quiet, almost hesitant, rose behind her. One dance, if you'd allow me. She turned. He was taller than she'd realized, though not by much, with broad shoulders that filled out a plain brown coat. His hair was pulled back, the edges softened by the glow of lantern light. His eyes were steady, not darting to the others, not measuring her against them. And for the first time that night, her heart didn't clench. His hand was warm when she placed hers in it, not the grasp of someone trying to impress or control, but of someone steadying a lantern in the wind. He led her toward the open space where couples moved in slow circles. The music wasn't hurried, just a gentle waltz that felt like a story being told in 3 beats. She noticed the way he didn't pull her close too quickly, giving her space to match his rhythm. His boots pressed against the wood floor with a quiet certainty, as if he'd learned long ago that there was no need to rush something worth holding. Round them, the barn kept breathing. Boots scuffed, skirts swished, and the old fiddler's bow drew sighs from the strings. But for her, the sound faded into something softer, like a river heard from far away. She searched for words, but he filled the silence before she needed to. I'm Elias, he said, his voice low enough that it didn't travel beyond the two of them. Her own name sounded different when she gave it to him. Later, they moved slowly, and she realized he wasn't trying to spin her, wasn't making her a spectacle. He was simply matching her steps, letting the music do the rest. Near the wall, she caught sight of the first man, watching with narrowed eyes. Elias didn't glance at him once. When the song ended, Elias guided her toward the barn's open doors. Cool night air slipped in, carrying the scent of hayfields and pine from the distant hills. Stars blinked in the black stretch above. You don't talk much, she said. I talk when there's something worth saying. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small shape. A bird carved from pale wood, its wings half spread, unpolished and rough around the edges. Started this a while back, he said, turning it over in his hands. Wasn't sure where it belonged. Figured it's still looking for a place to land. She traced the grain with her thumb. It's beautiful. Not yet, he said. Needs time. Behind them, another tune began. Laughter swelled inside the barn, but neither of them stepped back in. Instead, they stood in the doorway, the music brushing past them like a breeze. A young waitress carrying mugs of cider passed by and gave her a curious look. He never dances, she whispered, nodding toward Elias before disappearing inside. The thought stayed with her. She didn't know why he'd chosen her for that one dance. But she knew it wasn't pity. There was something in his manner. Quiet, watchful, as though he saw her without needing to weigh or measure anything first. When they finally parted that night, he tipped his hat in a way that felt less like goodbye and more like a promise. She walked home under the starlight, her shoes brushing the dirt road, the wooden bird warm in her palm dot, and somewhere along the way, she realized she wasn't thinking of the man who had mocked her. She was thinking of Elias's hands, steady, as if made for holding on. The days that followed didn't arrive with declarations or grand gestures. Just the slow and steady way seasons turn without asking permission. Elias began appearing in quiet, unannounced ways. One morning, she found him on her porch, crouched. Over the loose step that had wobbled for years, he didn't knock, just tipped his head when she opened the door, a small smile creasing his face. "Wasn't safe," he said, tightening the last nail dot another time. He stopped by her barn. Noticing the door's hinge straining against rust, they worked together, him holding the weight of the door while she bolted it back in place. The work was easy between them, no fumbling for conversation, no trying to fill silences. Just the sound of tools, the occasional shared glance, and the steady rhythm of breathing the same air. Sometimes they'd sit with tin mugs of coffee on her porch, as the sun slipped low, painting the sky in bands of orange and violet. He'd talk about the places he'd been, cold mountain passes where snow felt so thick you could hear it settling, river crossings where the water bit like teeth. His words were slow, deliberate, like each memory had been carved into him, and he was offering her the smoothest parts. She didn't ask much about why he'd come to this town or what had kept him from staying anywhere too long. There was a sense that some things didn't need to be forced into the light, of course. The town had its own way of filling in the blanks. Some whispered that he'd left a family somewhere. Others said he'd been in trouble once, the kind no man talks about. She heard it all but kept her peace. She'd learned long ago that truth doesn't live in gossip's mouth. One evening, rain came without warning, hammering the roof in heavy sheets. The wind drove it sideways, rattling the windows. Elias had been helping mend a fence on the far edge of her property, and by the time he reached her porch, he was soaked through. She pulled him inside, setting a chair near the fire. The room warmed slowly, the scent of wet earth mixing with smoke. He held his hands near the flames, steam rising from his sleeves. "You ever think about leaving here?" he asked after a while. "Not in yours," she said. "I've had enough of starting over." They sat there, the fire popping gently between them. After a while, she spoke without meaning to. "People have always said I'm too much of something, too big, too opinionated, too different." She let the words hang like laundry on a line, waiting for the wind to take them. Elias didn't rush to answer. When he finally spoke, it was soft, certain. "You're exactly enough." She turned to look at him, but he was gazing at the flames, as though he'd just said something as ordinary as asking for more coffee. But the words sank into her like roots finding water to mornings later. She opened her door to find the wooden bird on her porch. Its wings were spread wide now, every line smooth and polished. On the underside, carved so faint it was almost hidden, were the words, "For when you're ready to fly." She held it in her hands for a long time, wondering if he knew just how far he'd already lifted her. She didn't know yet that the first man, bitter from his own failures, had started whispering a new kind of poison into the town's ear. She didn't know that the barn where they'd first danced would soon become the place where every whisper turned to a roar. But she would, and when it came, it would test whether she'd stand or turn away. The trouble didn't arrive like thunder. It crept in quiet, curling under doors and sliding between cracks until it was everywhere. She first caught wind of it at the Mercantile. The women stopped talking when she walked in, their eyes flicking from her face to the floor. A man she'd known since childhood avoided her entirely. By the third day, she heard the words outright, that at the barn dance, she had forced herself on men, that she'd taken advantage of a lonely stranger. The story shifted with each telling, but the sting stayed sharp. She knew exactly whose voice had planted the seed. The rancher who'd humiliated her that night now found a new way to press her down, and others, eager for the distraction of gossip, helped the rumor grow. For a day, maybe two, she considered retreat, staying home, letting the talk burn itself out. But the quiet of her cabin felt different now, heavier. She'd worked hard for the life she had to let someone else shrink it. On the fourth evening, she heard music drifting across the hills, another gathering at the barn. The same fiddles, the same smell of wood smoke and hay, the same place where she'd first felt both humiliation and hope in the space of a heartbeat. She almost didn't go, but then she remembered the weight of Elias's words, "You're exactly enough," and the smooth feel of the carved bird in her palm. She put on her blue dress. When she walked in, the air shifted, conversations dropped. The rancher stood near the back, leaning on a post with a smugness that made her jaw tighten. And then Elias stepped forward. He crossed the barn floor like a man with nowhere else to be but in front of her. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. It was an invitation, one given in the open, with every eye in the room watching as they stepped onto the floor. The rancher muttered something under his breath, but before the words could spread, Elias turned his head. "I've worked in more towns than I can count," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "And I've met women worth crossing mountains for. She's one of them. You want to talk about her. You talk about her courage, her kindness, the way she stands when most would fall. You talk about that. Or you don't talk at all." The fiddler picked up the bow, and the music swelled. The rancher's mouth closed. Round the edges of the room, heads nodded. The old fiddler, the young waitress from that night. Even a few who believed the worst now turned away from the gossip, like it was something foul in the air. Elias's hand was steady on hers. They moved together in slow circles, the crowd falling away until it felt like the whole night was only theirs. The blue dress swayed around her legs. The floor was solid beneath her feet. She wasn't lighter, but she was free of the weight she'd carried for years, the weight of being seen as something less. When the song ended, Elias bent his head just enough for her to hear. "Told you the bird would fly when it found its place," and she knew, in that moment, that her place wasn't in the shadows where others tried to keep her. It was here, in the open. Dancing without apology, narrators closing, out here in the West. Beauty wasn't in faces or figures. It was in the hands that stayed steady, the words that built instead of broke, and the hearts that didn't turn away when the room grew quiet. If you've ever had someone see you exactly as you are and love you all the more for it, the worth of gold. So if this story touched you, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and maybe share it with someone who needs to be reminded they're exactly enough.